All right, so before I want to start, I didn't realize that we would be so lucky as to have one of the co-founders of the Happiness Initiative, Eldon Goldenberg, who is going to stand up for a minute, because Eldon really, like me, put tons of time and energy into this project. So he's one of you, so if you have questions, he'll be around. So let's before I start talking, I thought we could all do a little song together, and you'll see the significance of this at the end of the talk. So I'm a terrible singer, so let's do this 3 times. And sing louder than me, or you'll have a lot of pain, which will not make you happy. Are you ready? The more we get together, 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 the more we get together, the happier we'll be. 'Cause your friends are my friends, and my friends are your friends. The more we get together, the happier we'll be. If we skip the chorus there, let's do it the right time this next 2 times. All right. The more we get together, 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 the more we get together, the happier we'll be. The more we get together, 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 the more we get together, the happier we'll be. 'Cause your friends are my friends, and my friends are your friends. The more we get together, the happier we'll be. Okay, can you do it really loud this time? All right? All right, go. The more we get together, 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 the more we get together, the happier we'll be. The more we get together, 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 the more we get together, the happier we'll be. 'Cause your friends are my friends, and my friends are your friends. The more we get together, the happier we'll be. Yay! All right. Our Declaration of Independence states that we all have an inalienable right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So imagine tomorrow you wake up and your federal policymakers include and count and care about your happiness as much as they care about the economy. Imagine that they start making decisions that really are about true work satisfaction, right? About that idea of having work that really is satisfying and really is meaningful to you. About your community. Imagine that they care as much about material well-being as they care about whether or not you feel loved, whether or not you feel like you have a safety net. Imagine that you have access to learning, because that's something that your government really cares about. Access to learning through your whole life, because we know that we learn and develop our whole lives. And then imagine also that, say you turn to the business section, and what counts as much as profit is also how much involvement communities have within their community, businesses have in their communities. And also, as important as profit and community is employee satisfaction. And then you go home at night, and instead of thinking about how well you're doing in terms of money, you're thinking about how well you're doing in terms of your overall happiness. That's our vision for the Happiness Initiative, is that we will supersede just gross domestic product, which is and money as what guides our society. So what's happening right now? What we're using right now at a federal level, at a national level, and at an individual level is money, right? Is economic growth. Our gross domestic product is what our government uses, which is the sum of all goods and services produced in a year. So let me tell you a little story. Let's just say tomorrow morning you wake up and you forget to turn the gas off or the electricity off on your stove. You burn your house down, maybe you burn your neighbor's house down too, or you burn the entire apartment complex down. On your way to work, you decide to drive to work because you're not going to take public transit. You cause an accident, 3 people die, there's blood all over the streets, and then you get to work and you get a phone call, and it's your wife or your husband and says, "Hey, I decided to divorce you. It's going to be really messy. It's going to cost a lot of money and a lot of misery, which is going to cause you to go out and spend a lot more money." You're awesome. you have done great things for GDP that year, right? Now let's just say you take a different trek. You get up that morning and you decide that instead of going out to breakfast, you go out in the garden and you pick some things that you've been growing, some fruits and vegetables, and you go back into the house and you make a leisurely breakfast with your family. And then instead of going to the gym or going and renting a bunch of vehicles or something, bikes, you decide to just go for a walk around your neighborhood. You greet some of your neighbors. You decide that's part of the point of the walk is to go say hi to some neighbors and look them in the eye and smile. Maybe scare them a little bit, though you might get used to it. And then you go home and you decide to spend the afternoon talking and maybe reading stories to each other and playing a board game. You're miserable. You have done nothing for gross domestic product. So that gives you kind of an idea of where money may not be and economic growth may not be the best guide for us. So some of the science around happiness, which we'll talk about probably more in the Q&A, tells us, this is from Lord Layard, who Eldon actually had the pleasure of meeting. He was one of the people who was instrumental in Great Britain using happiness, where they've actually are starting to use happiness with gross domestic product to guide all of their policy decisions, and just finished their second survey, the results of which are out, and you can see at our Happy Counts website. So Layard did some research, and he found that where gross domestic product in the United States had tripled since 1950s, and the adjusted per capita income had doubled since 1960s, people's happiness in terms of their satisfaction with life, meaning is this life worth living, and affect, meaning how happy are you, how often do you feel happy, how often do you feel sad, your affect is your feelings, positive, negative, hadn't really changed, and in some cases had actually gone down for some populations. So what this speaks to also is something called the Easterlin paradox. Who here knows about the Easterlin paradox besides Eldon? Well, Eldon does. Do you want to tell what the Easterlin paradox is?
Well, the Easterlin paradox is just that as incomes increase, at the beginning, from abject poverty, you see people getting happier. But there's a threshold beyond which it doesn't seem to make any difference to how well people are doing it for.
Right. So about 75K for a family of 4. And of course, that's going to be different between whether you're in Montana or Manhattan. But about 75K for a family of 4. As you make more money, your happiness doesn't really increase that much. More than up to that point, your happiness increases quite a bit as you make more. And that number is sort of squishy. And some people can get by with quite a bit less and still have that reported sense of affect, how they're feeling, and satisfaction with life be quite high. So where are we when money does all of the talking? The United States is the only wealthy nation that doesn't have paid sick leaves, paid holidays, paid maternity leaves, and paid vacations. So the other nations that don't have paid vacations are Burma, Nepal, Suriname, and Guyana, places that have pretty horrible atrocities also happening. That's from the OECD fact book, and the other facts are from the CIA fact book, so it's not some liberal think tank collecting the information. We spend twice as much per capita on healthcare, and we're the second in world obesity. Who do you think is fatter than us? What nation do you think is fatter than us? I'll give you a hint. It has the word weight in its weight. Kuwait. All right. So that's a little bit of sort of where our vision and where we are now. So let's just stop and watch a video, and then we'll go on.
Do you have a minute to talk?
No.
Okay. About this sign?
I like it.
You like it? Great.
8 smiles.
8 miles per hour.
Kimberly Stratford isn't trying to make a fool of herself.
Would this encourage you to smile at a stranger?
I just did.
Yeah, you did.
I just did.
She works for the city of Victoria, British Columbia, and she wants people there to smile more for their health and contentment.
Do you think about your happiness?
Oh, yes.
Yeah? And do you think that you're a happy person?
Yes.
It's coming out of the work that we're doing as part of the Happiness Index initiative here in Greater Victoria. Part of our role in government is to have our citizens be happy and engaged in our community.
A lot of people in Victoria do, yes.
Yeah.
Happiness index? But Kimberly isn't kidding. Victoria's been measuring the happiness of its residents for the past 2 years, and most of them seem pleased by the effort.
And welcome to Victoria.
We've had a little over 3,000 people take the survey.
Now some people are trying to make Seattle a happier city too.
I'm intrigued by it. I think we're going to learn a lot as a result of the project that's being undertaken to determine how people's levels of happiness is. And I intend to use that to help shape public policy.
But can you really measure happiness? The people of tiny Bhutan in the Himalayas think so. It's even in their constitution.
And Article 9.2 says that the objective of Bhutan's development must be the attainment of gross national happiness.
In 1972, Bhutan's 16-year-old king declared that gross national happiness is more important than gross national product. Since then, Bhutan has been seeking happiness advice from international experts.
When it comes to doing things to improve Bhutan's future, we say there's no monopoly. We don't care where the ideas come from as long as they're good ideas for our country.
Those good ideas helped launch a whole new science. And for quite a while now, various organizations, including the Gallup poll, have been measuring happiness around the world.
The Scandinavian countries often come up on top. In those countries, there tends to be a pretty strong sense of community. There tends to be an economic safety net that makes people have less concern and worries about losing income and falling out of the economic system in ways that can be really harmful, generally lower levels of poverty. So those are the kinds of things that I think provide the framework and foundation for people to be satisfied or happy.
But researchers find that despite a half-century of income growth, levels of happiness in many wealthy countries, including the United States, are flat or falling.
And the mistake we've been making in the past is overestimating the extent to which money in GDP is going to contribute to our sense of well-being, that more money and more GDP is really all it takes to be happy.
With advice from many scientists, Bhutan concluded that well-being depends on 9 aspects of life, not just income.
Ultimately, your measure of happiness or well-being has to be a subjective measure. It has to be asking people how they're feeling.
Michael Pennick, a Victoria epidemiologist, worked on a survey to measure well-being in Bhutan. When he returned to Victoria, he met with a group of city leaders.
And he said, I think it'd be really cool if we did something like this in Canada. And almost everybody in the Community Indicators Network said, yeah.
At first blush, there may be some people saying, okay, that's kind of flaky to be measuring happiness, and how do you do that? The truth is, if you can measure it out, understand and mark it, you can understand what impact you're having on your community and your neighborhood.
They formed a group called HIP, the Happiness Index Partnership, to use the survey in Victoria.
We all threw a bit of money on the table and funded the first survey, and away it went.
And we had an extraordinary return. We sent out 6,500 surveys and we got almost 2,500 back. And people were really engaged and we got good data.
Victoria's overall happiness score was 76, very high by international standards. But its citizens reported being financially insecure and continually time pressured.
I think it's overall the world in general has become a little more jaded.
Yeah, and we put on what's called a World Cafe.
Following that 2008 survey, Victoria held a town meeting to discuss the results and recommend improvements.
There was curiosity. What can we do on a day-to-day basis to be almost like a nicer person or to pass along happiness?
One of the important things for any mayor is how happy are your citizens?
And in 2009, Michael Pennick took the idea to Seattle.
We had a great reaction from the City Council when we brought the Mike Pennick from Victoria, BC to come and talk about the idea of measuring happiness and the things that they were doing in Victoria to measure happiness. People were really intrigued by this concept, so to me the idea of measuring people's happiness or satisfaction with the way in which their life is going is a really important tool that will help to create not only good public policy, but also a healthy community.
This idea of this gross national happiness has been guiding Bhutan's development.
Soon afterwards, Bhutan's Commissioner of Happiness also visited Seattle.
In terms of gross national happiness, we're very happy to share whatever little experience we have.
But the idea really took off last fall when Sustainable Seattle, the first organization in the world to develop regional indicators of well-being, made the project its focus. Sustainable Seattle put the survey online for anyone to take. A Seattle Times columnist called it a squirm fest.
You're going to have a reaction to it. It's going to ask you questions that you might not have thought about asking yourself, and it might ask you questions that you really don't feel necessarily very comfortable being asked. So it's going to cause you to pause and think.
At the end, there's a payoff. You get an immediate well-being score in each aspect of life the survey measures.
It's really nice to be able to say, do you have a purpose, and be able to go, absolutely, 10 out of 10.
It takes 20 to 30 minutes, but in the first 2 weeks, nearly 4,000 people completed the survey. So far, people in Seattle report strong social support, but serious time stress and deep concerns about the environment. But these results come from people who chose to take the survey on their own.
We are seeking to do a scientific-based survey so that we get statistically significant results. Our next step is to develop objective indicators that tell the whole picture, that show the balanced picture.
We've had quite a few people respond saying, wow, I didn't realize I was as unhappy as this survey points me out.
Organizers are inviting experts and partner organizations to hold town meetings and provide individual, organizational, and policy actions to make Seattle a happier place.
And I think it's going to be a great way in which to bring people in and bring them into involvement and reaction to what is happening both in the community as well as in government.
The hope is that if the project is successful here, other cities will follow.
What would be wonderful is if Seattle can compare itself to many other cities in the United States.
Leaders of the project say endless economic growth is simply unsustainable on a finite planet.
Our children are not going to be the consumers that we are. As a country, as a world, we can't afford that level of overconsumption.
And it isn't making us any happier.
And this world isn't so loving. And these lives that most of us are living are not so good. There's a lot of really hard things that happen.
So we really do need to start paying attention to those other things that contribute to a sense of well-being.
And if this initiative truly succeeds, people will be sad less in Seattle and everywhere else.
Imagine a world where you could wake up and just go, wow, this is entirely and completely and for everybody a cool place to be. I am so glad that I am living in this century. Okay, let's stop that. Presentation back on. All right. Okay, so I think the story bears repeating. You heard it on the video, but I love this story. So 41 years ago, the 17-year-old king of Bhutan was asked, what are you going to do to improve your country's gross national product? It was national then, not domestic. And his response was, gross national happiness is more important than gross national product. Now, has anybody here been to Bhutan? No? Bhutan is a small country right next to Nepal. It's situated in the Himalayas. And it's above India. India is a country that has just about exactly the amount of energy consumption that we do. So it's an overpopulated country, huge energy consumption, huge energy needs. Now, Bhutan is a very, very poor country. Well, in another country, if a king had said that or a world leader had said that, he may have been laughed out of office even, right? But not in Bhutan. They take their king very seriously. So they started they use a subjective measure of well-being, that's a survey, and then they use objective measures. So that includes gross domestic product, as well as other objective measures to see how the country is doing in terms of their happiness. They had a decision to make. They're a very, very poor country, one of the poorest countries in the world. And when you think of the Himalayas and you think of a country that could use a lot of energy, what's the immediate, most obvious money-making scheme that you can think of? There's big hydro, right? Just dam up one of those valleys and sell it to India. You make a bunch of money. Well, they decided they decided to rate this decision, as they do in that country, based on the domains of happiness. And they found that in material well-being, it scored very high. It was a 1 out of 4, it came to a 4. But in the environment and in the community, it scored very low. And so they didn't put that hydro dam in. And as a matter of fact, they keep 60% of their land is kept in nature preserves because they see the importance of that for their community and for the well-being and the happiness of their people. So this is being taken very, very seriously in Bhutan. It was not last year, but the year before that last, the United Nations adopted a resolution that said gross domestic product is not a sufficient measure for policymakers. Said Bhutan is onto something, and then urged member countries to start doing something to measure happiness. From that, last year in April, the United Nations put together a conference where they brought together about 800 people from around the world, scientists, grassroots activists, academics, to launch a global happiness and well-being movement. And we were there as part of that. And this is part of our work to do this here in the United States at a grassroots level, where I mentioned earlier in England, as well as in France and China and some places in some cities in Brazil outside of Sao Paulo, where policymakers are very actively engaged in finding what is that measure and how can we better govern for our nation, our city, or our region's well-being. So that's where the happiness comes in. Happiness Initiative comes in at happycounts.org, where we have the tools and resources based on Bhutan's gross national happiness philosophy, so that anybody can start using that subjective measure of well-being at any level. So how many of you here took the happiness index? Yeah, we got 42 of you took the index. So let's look at your scores, and then we'll go to question and answer. Okay. So we did a random sampling of the United States, and that's where those national averages come in. And typically what we're finding is that pretty much everybody scores lowest in time balance. You scored a little bit lower in time balance than the national average. But what's interesting to me is that you scored lowest in community. I find that really, really interesting. A little bit about community is that the scientific, so we define community in terms of family and friends. So do you feel, are you spending good quality time with your family and friends? Do you feel loved? In terms of volunteer work, so that's both volunteering for an accredited NGO, non-governmental organization, as well as just going out and helping people, just giving your time and resources. And then in trust, and that's that question in the survey: if you lost your wallet, do you feel like it would be returned, by a neighbor, by a policeman? So the scientific findings are saying that there's that Easterlin paradox, after you meet your basic needs and have satisfaction in work, the biggest bang that you can get to increase your sense of well-being, your satisfaction with life and happiness, is in your community. And that happier people actually make that effort to spend time with their family and friends. Even though sometimes it's like, oh, I'm so busy, they'll actually carve that time out and spend time with their family and friends. So it's interesting that you guys score low in community. I mean, you're here. This is part of your community. And this doesn't mean, this is your own self-assessment, right? This isn't an external judgment. This is your own personal assessment of this is what I actually really care about. And so this can indicate to you, this is where maybe I should spend a little bit more of my time and my effort. Eldon was really our data guy. So Eldon, did you have any insights into these scores? I'm just totally jumping this on you.
Yeah, so I'll start. But the one thing that springs to mind looking at this is because it's self-rated, sometimes people who care really deeply about something actually score lower, because that makes us be more self-critical. So I'm looking at that, wondering if the self-selection here is people who find community important and are looking for more, and therefore score lower in the survey.
Right. So I'm going to go ahead and close off here. So you can get the toolkits online at happycounts.org. And the real takeaway from this part of the talk is that this subjective indicator of well-being, the survey or the happiness index, is scalable. You can use it. I can get you a unique URL, and you can use it for any scale. So obviously for a talk, we have a family using it in California. We have got cities using it. We've got many different universities that are using this for their staff, for their students, and for their community. So before we go to question and answer, you're probably asking to yourself, I'm sure you're asking this, why is Laura wearing that goofy cape? What's up with that? Well, first of all, this is to let you know that our URL is Happy Counts, right? So there's the count of happiness. And secondly, the most important thing in all of this message is we have one planet and 7 billion people. And what really, really counts is our happiness. So now we go to Q&A. So, David, are you going to field the Q&A, or do you guys just do it informally?
Questions?
Awesome. I love it.
Hi, thank you very much. I have a question. Have you collected data on a correlation between people obtaining like a certain, or is there a correlation between consumption, like material consumption, and stress levels? Like, you know, hardcore data.
Yeah. So we're not a scientific organization. We're really a grassroots organization. We are working with a group of scientists at San Francisco State University where they have an organization called Beyond the Purchase, and they're looking at that kind of data. And what they're finding is that if you look at your consumption between material goods and experiences, consuming experiences will give you longer lasting happiness. And then there's further scientific finding that says actually that giving, and as long as you're giving to somebody, like you're actually giving to somebody that you see or an organization that you know about, and then you get sort of a acknowledgement in response, that also will increase your happiness even more than experience. But the studies around stress and consumption, you'd have to look. We're not a science-based organization. There is a really good report out there that was issued at that United Nations meeting called the World Happiness Report. And you can get it on our website under resources, or just put the World Happiness Report, issued by Columbia University. And it's a meta-analysis of the many different surveys that are out there with some findings that are really fascinating. So that's a good place to start. And it's online. That's all free download. So, yeah. Anything else?
I'm curious as to where the happiest places in the world are and why they're happy.
Right, right. So you saw in the video that Gallup organization is using their they call it the World Healthways poll, and they're finding consistently that based on their questionnaire that the countries in Northern Europe are the happiest countries. What we think is the cause for this is that they have a very strong social safety net there. So if you lose your job, you're going to get another job. What's that? Right, it's policy decisions. So they have, we like to give an example of so workers' arbeit in Holland, where this is around time balance and a policy example. Where any worker can go to their boss and say, I don't want to work full-time, I just want to work part-time. And unless that boss can make an absolute case that they cannot get by without you working part-time, without you working full-time, you have the right to work part-time. Now your benefits will go down. Of course, you won't get full-time salary for part-time. But you will not be and cannot be laid off in 2 years or 6 months. You'll go ahead and be able to work that kind of the hours that you want to work. And there's some other interesting policies that in in Australia, I think this is one of the reasons why you see so many Australians traveling. They have a policy where you can work for 4 years and then get the 5th year off. You just get 80%. Is that right? You get 80% of your pay. So somebody's better at math. Maybe it's 3 years and 4 years off, but you get 80% of your pay. So you'll be working for 4 years full time, get 80% of your pay, and then the 5th year you get paid 80% of your pay, and you can travel or do whatever you want with that money. So these are some examples of policy decisions that really can increase our well-being. There's some other research that's out there that's saying that countries in South America are the happiest, and the indication that the science that they're based on is something that it's in actually one of the best books around personal happiness or positive psychology, which is called The How of Happiness. So if you came here to find out what's going to make you happy, you probably are disappointed, read The How of Happiness. That'll give you some really good idea of personal happiness. What science is saying, and I think this is probably a little bit of an exaggeration, is that about 50% of your personal happiness is genetic. You're just born with it. About 10% is your circumstances, although there's some other science that says it's a little bit more than that. So the circumstances are what we call the domains of happiness. So that's that material well-being, governance, learning, community, health. So about 10%, and then the 40% is how you think, right? It's just, and there's some practices around that. Do you express your gratitude readily? Do you count your blessings in a sense? Do you say what you're grateful for? Are you taking time to give? That'll make you happier. Are you taking time to just be mindfulness, or just take time to just with yourself, to just follow your breath, or just be present in the moment for a few moments every day? Those are the things that you can actually change how happy you feel. And I'll give you an example. We had, with our survey, we had a woman take the survey about 2 years ago. She actually does a lot of survey work, and she found that she was rating herself, assessing herself, her own happiness, between a 5 and a 7 for when it asked how happy she felt about one of the domains. But in terms of more objectively in that subjective measure, rating how well off she thought she was in those domains. So did she feel like her environment, did she feel like her work experience was secure, et cetera? She was rating it a 10. And it helped her realize that externally, her life isn't going to get any better than it is. But internally, she's like, So she started making some changes. And she's actually working now, she's in Santa Cruz. She's actually working now to do something like this in her community. So, all right, we might not have a presentation soon. So to answer what your question really is, which now I've lost it, but I actually had the answer, but so say it again. Okay, so the reason that I wanted to tell you all of that is the difference between your attitude. So there's some findings out there, like the Happy Planet Index, that's finding that countries in South America are some of the happiest countries in the world because people can change their minds. And that's a really important finding, but at the same time we want to be careful about that, because then that gives you some basis of saying, well, we don't really need to change the circumstances. It's only 10%. You can kind of tell the bullshit factor in that. It's like you can't say that we can just continue to have a declining economy and ecosystems that continue to be in distress, and it's all in our minds. It's our circumstances too, as we find in Northern Europe. So, yeah. All right. Yeah, and there's this project actually in the Victoria got started with healthcare officials who were really looking at what does healthcare really mean. And you saw that fact from the CIA World Fact, because it is that in the United States we use twice as many, we have twice as high healthcare, and yet our actual, our obesity levels are really high, our mortality levels are, I think, 50 out of 150, 46. So there's actually a lot in the healthcare field looking at a more holistic nature of what healthcare is. Problem is, of course, when money drives everything, then where are you? So this project is talking about a systematic change. And we're trying to do this because we really feel strongly that it comes from the bottom. But we're doing this at a grassroots level. So we actually have a hospital that's using the happiness index for a cohort of their employees. They have 3 cohorts of employees where they're using the index before, after, and 6 weeks down the road for an intervention where they train their employees on mindfulness. So it's those kind of little changes that we can be a part of. But taking a bigger look at what healthcare is embedded in this project. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's more like that's an economic driver, like pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah.
Like kind of paying lots into healthcare because we're not, figure out the root issues and dealing with it. So.
Right. There was I can't remember a while ago where the hospitals were dinged because they were basing their decisions on money and just throwing patients out. That's the kind of thing that is making our nation sicker and sicker. And if we have a well-being metric where we really care about well-being instead of just money, particularly for healthcare, it seems obvious. But when we have money driving everything, it's not. So it takes this kind of work, grassroots work, to make that happen. So.
My question kind of follows along with what you're saying. We live in a very capitalistic country. I mean, that's kind of what we started on. So are there trends that you're able to observe that give you an indication of how long it would take for something like this to take hold? I mean, environmentally, we've grown in the last 30 years, so it is doable, but
right.
Do you guys have any indication of?
Well, we're much cheered by what's happening in the UK. And if you go to our website, let's see if I have enough of that battery power, you can actually look at the let's see if I can bring this up. You can actually look at, oops, sorry. Oh, no, you're going into my personal stuff. You can actually look at what the UK has done. They have this happiness meter. So now you're talking to somebody who's like going into the data. You're like, yay, numbers! I don't have to talk to people. But if you go to our website, you'll see it on other reports. You'll see what the government of England is doing, where they actually have what they call a happiness wheel. And they're using this information for their policy decisions. So in the United States, there's been some discussion of including some questions around satisfaction with life and affect in the Census Bureau. And Obama did commission a committee to discuss happiness metrics for HUD, for housing and urban development. But, whether happiness and well-being metrics at a national level would inform the government is probably really far off. So we need to have this happen in location-based, and then have that discussion, have these talks about that, so start those conversations. So the United Nations is making a push. I talked about that earlier with the resolution. And there's a lot happening elsewhere in the world, but we're a little lagging. I don't want to get too opinionated, but I think we sometimes confuse democracy and capitalism. And that might be one of the reasons that our country will probably lag for a while. So, yeah. Eldon, jump in if you have other things you want to add. Please do jump in.
Kind of going off of that question, based on what you've seen in Seattle, are there any trends compared to other cities that have done this survey? And it looks like you're involved with City Council. Is the City of Seattle looking at incorporating this type of information into any policy changes?
So in terms of other cities, we've been working with a couple of other cities on this, Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and Nevada City, California, and then starting to work with a city actually in Columbia, Columbia. But we're a relatively new project, and so we haven't been able to do that sort of greater data gathering and data analysis around that. The World Happiness Report that I mentioned earlier does look at this across, globally. So that's an interesting way. We'd love to be able to do that for different cities. That's an aspiration that we have. And in Seattle, what we did last year is we were funded by the Department of Neighborhoods, where we went in and worked with some immigrant and refugee communities. They did an opt-in survey. So that was the Oromo community. The Oromos are from Ethiopia, Somali, Vietnamese Friendship Association. We worked with youth, and then the Filipino we worked with elders, and we were very interested because for me, what really drives me on this project is social justice. I was raised very poor, so I have an idea of what that feels like, the injustice. So we were thinking, well, what's it going to look like for these different communities, immigrant and refugee communities? We thought they would score lower. We were surprised to find that every single community scored lower on every single domain. And the Aroma scored between 17 and 25 points lower on every single domain. So that's an indication that there needs to be some more analysis and a deeper look at that. So we're in conversation right now with Richard Conlin to really further the conversation in Seattle around that, particularly for something called International Happiness Day, which will be from the United Nations, was declared on March 20th. Looking at trying to really generate more conversation. So, yeah.
I was curious to know how you approach businesses and organizations and thought about adding employee satisfaction. The obvious thought is it might boost creativity, but it will decrease productivity. So how do you...
We preach to the choir. So we were just speaking with, and I won't mention it, but I was just speaking with the CEO and the top level suite of an organization here. Actually, they're located. Their headquarters are in Redmond, yeah, he's the driver. So, but they get it. They get it. And there's a lot of businesses that get it. That employee satisfaction and happiness really does equate with greater profitability. The one link that I'd say, and this is from my experience as running a business and with an MBA, is that they understand how important employee turnover is. It's not just satisfaction, but also employee turnover. So we're basically preaching to the choir and working with the choir to make the voice louder instead of trying to go out and convince the businesses that are all about money that it's not just money. So, yeah. Well, the field of positive psychology was born out of dissatisfaction with the field of psychology from Freud, which said that, okay, now we know everything about what makes us unhappy. Let's find out more about what makes us happy. So that book that I said, The How of Happiness, is an excellent resource for that. But I'll say, a kind of very personal note, I think that the reason that people do the kind of work that they do in the for-cause field is because it's something that they need to also address in their own personal lives. And my personal journey in doing this work for the last, it's been about 5 years with Sustainable Seattle, and then we launched that into its own organization, the Happiness Initiative, has made me a lot happier. But that road to happiness has, dipped down in some real misery. Had to get some real misery to get the what about you, Alvin?
I think one thing I noticed with everyone involved is that we all got involved from a place of unhappiness. But actually, what you learn as you immerse yourself in the individual side is useful. My life is better because I've put into practice some of the things I first read about theoretically. And on the policy and statistics side, on the one hand, it's frustrating that we have to keep making what seems like a very obvious case over and over again. On the other, you do see that there are things that can be done, and there are ways you can actually improve large numbers of people's lives. So that can be quite uplifting as well.
Yeah, I think it's, that lesson of that we do the work that we do that is really very, very much tied to our own personal needs and what are our personal needs. Getting those cognitive, like this is a scientific findings, getting those cognitive learnings and putting them into real life. Like the sooner that you can do that, the better. But they're hard knocks to take. There's scientific finding. Here we go. That says that you don't get the highs if you don't have the lows. So if you try to inebriate yourself from having the lows, like I'll take a drink and have some chips instead of having my feelings, you're not going to get the highs. You're not going to get the good feelings of happiness. So, but that takes time. It takes time and energy to be able to let yourself have your low feelings and safety. And a lot of people don't have a safe place for that. So that means that you now have to create a safe place so that you can have your lows, so that you can actually be happy. Those are hard lessons. Those are really hard lessons. Yeah.
This is maybe more of a comment
Right.
Similar in terms of their circumstances or their, the straits they're in. So I guess I'm wondering. And then, I think in a weird way, we're connected through social media, but also less connected on a kind of intimate level.
Yeah.
Than maybe we were. So I guess there's two factors in there that have really changed in our society, say maybe in the past 25 to 30 years, that have. I'm just wondering if you sense that those, the economic disparity and the kind of artificial connectivity that we have are contributors to feeling less happy.
Right. So we know that in 1980, the top 1% of people in the United States earned 8% of GDP. And by 2010, they were earning 24%. And in 2010, the bottom 50% of us were earning 20%. So that leaves just a little for the middle class, right? This really shrinking middle class. We also know that the United States has one of the highest Gini coefficients, so one of the highest rich-poor gaps of all of the developed nations. One of the lowest is Switzerland, which is also a country that rates itself quite happy. So scientific findings are telling us that even if you're quite wealthy, if there's a lot of economic disparity, then you're not as happy as if there were less economic disparity. And for those of us who have gotten that local global connection, which I think if you live in Seattle, you kind of by force of everybody else have to, that includes the global understanding. So we know that, for example, that with chocolate, the International Labor Organization tells us that about 80% of chocolate is from slave labor, and that's children from the Ivory Coast. So I like M&Ms, but I just can't eat them anymore. Right? Except if I'm in a psychotic mood, and I can have an M&M. Like, that's part of that is messaging this, is getting those ideas across, because those resonate with people. They can see the truth in that. And then, so the other question was around the community piece, and I mentioned earlier that taking time to foster those relationships with people you love and who love you and help you to feel loved really will increase your happiness. But how many ads do you see that say, don't go buy this beautiful lipstick, go spend time with somebody who you love and tell them how much you love them. It's like, no, buy them something instead, So there's an organization called values.org that's interesting, that they're trying to do something. They're from a very right-wing religious contingency, which is a little bit unfortunate, but they're doing something interesting and trying to really get people to think about their values. But in the field of positive psychology is really trying to put it out there. As often happens with the left, is that they get kind of caught in the minutia instead of getting the overall message across. And that's part of, and I'm exposing myself here, but that's part of our job, is to that think like an elephant. It's that, or don't think of an elephant. It's that, how do we message this in a way that people really get it? So, yeah.
Can we do about maybe 2 more questions?
Okay.
By coincidence, were you or maybe anyone else here at Town Hall last night?
No, I wasn't. Sorry, but say it. What was? Tell us what was.
Was anyone here at Town Hall last night?
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple guys, they call themselves the Minimalists. They have a huge following now, and I don't own their book, but they published a couple books. They have very, very lucrative jobs in their mid-20s and gave it all up to just get rid of the condos and SUVs and everything else. And they're not like you. They don't have studies to turn to, but they're just writing about their experience and how they are finding happy. So you might want to know about them.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah. Well, it's in. Yeah.
People following them now, and
yeah.
all over, just talking about.
Yeah.
They're very sort of interesting, charismatic, down-to-earth guys.
Yeah.
Just FYI.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. I mean, science is nice to have, but basically it justifies what we already know. But this is the reason one of the reasons I do this work is that it's about happiness. And whereas working in sustainability, people are like, "What are you doing in happiness? How is that related to sustainability?" I'm like, no. sustainability is just basic common sense, and happiness is where we really want to be when we look at it in a broader context. And it's not about more stuff. It's about what's here and how we connect with others. And I'll just say that there's, when people ask me, like, what's the one thing that will make me happier? Like, tell me what the one thing is. And the answer is others. So, not more stuff, being richer, having more titles. So, thank you for that. Sorry.
Following up on the second half of her question, and then you just said what will make me happy or others, I want to follow up on the whole social media, community, and just how much that has, I mean, people, it's just this massive global monster that we're all completely sucked into. And I don't know about anyone else, but I find I end up liking some of my friends less after I'm friends with them. So I'm curious, where do you see that whole thing going? Since that does have such a hold on our community, and for many people that is their community, and community relates to happiness, and just I'm curious to know of your opinion. I spend a lot of time speculating this, like, what's going to happen to the Facebook monster in the next 10 years? Where do you see that going? Do you see us going back into a resurgence of, in person, people writing notes and thank you cards?
Yeah.
Actually sending a birthday card instead of being alerted, oh, it's so-and-so's birthday.
Well, we've been trying to answer this question a little bit with a couple of the people who are some of the founders of the Occupy movement, where they're doing these online cafe style meetings. And where they really are trying to, the question they're asking is, how can we make this work at location based, more so that people actually have an opportunity to exploit all of the different social media they're using for greater connection, and then can take that to a meeting face to face and having meaningful activities and projects that they're doing face to face. And that's a wonderful challenge that we have, because we do have a way of learning from others and integrating those lessons from others, and then taking them location based and really just making it flower in our neighborhood or in our community. So yeah, I mean, you know it, you just said it. That's where like science can tell us this and that, but you know it. It's like, how do we use that to get more face-to-face time that's meaningful, that we're really doing something that makes us feel good and helps improve our community. So, thank you. Does somebody have a last comment?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I just went to tea or coffee with a friend of mine, or somebody I know professionally, and they brought up like iPhones, and they talk, I don't have one, I have never had one, I don't have apps, but they said the massive growth, and they said maybe 1 billion people use them, and it's incredible how fast it's growing. So I think of that listening today, because to me it's an example of scaling something out. And we're here as creative oriented, there's creatives, there's designers. Looking at that massive scale, and somebody asked earlier, well, happiness scale. Well, how many designers or creators are working to support happiness? In fact, I think 10 and will scale, but where are we putting our creative talent, right, and our skill and ability? Not that we have to, but I think it's important. What does that mean? I'm particularly hearing questions here in the room, and I also feel like, the technology is just a tool, but are we really connecting more people through it? And equality.
Beautiful. So let's just get that question in one simple question for us to end with. You. Get this one simple question for us to end with. Make it one question that we're going to end with. Yeah? You do? Say it again, what? Okay, say it one more time.
Yeah, how many people who were here today feel moved, son of judgment, just curious, as creatives to volunteer and support happiness?
Okay, beautiful. And somebody else had a last comment, so go ahead. This is a comment, right?
I mean, just based on some of your stuff, I have kind of it's not a shameless plug, but to answer your question, like my thesis project was surrounded this idea, and it's acknowledging others, and you actually create a greater sense of your personal happiness when you actually focus away from yourself and onto what others are doing for you. So if you guys want to check it out, it's called Infinite Good, infinitegood.com. And it's just kind of a visual representation, and you can kind of share stories about other people, share it to your Facebook, using social media in a different way, rather instead of intrinsically about yourself, but extrinsically about others. So, not saying it's going to ever take off, but who knows?
Maybe. Maybe Infinite Good. I love it. Okay. Was there one other burning last comment? Yeah. What do you want us to do? What would help our project is if you would use the survey. Use it for your clients, use it for your family, use it in any way that you would like to use it. And it's info@happycounts.org. We can give you a unique URL, and you can use it at any scale for any project that you want. So,
Thank you.